Greetings. Do you search for high quality companies to invest in by screening for high ROE? Do you? Why don't you use Clean Surplus ROE? I'll tell you why you don't use it, because you've never heard of it, because no one's ever heard of it. Why has no one ever heard of Clean Surplus ROE? So what I'm going to do in this video is show you how to compute Clean Surplus ROE. It's super simple. Give you a few examples and compare it to the regular accounting ROE, and that way you'll be able to decide for yourself which one you like better. First, a disclaimer though. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm not an investment professional, investment advisor, all of that. So this is for entertainment purposes only today. I don't think I need to go through all the bullets. I mean, if you're a fan of Warren Buffett, you know this idea of looking for high ROE. Why? Well, managers of companies can either use debt or they can use equity to fund their operations and expansions. And Buffett likes companies with low debt, which just leaves equity. He likes ROE, or at least he did in 1977 in his first shareholder letter, as a metric by which to judge how effectively managers are utilizing capital. It's just like return on investment. Um, and then, like 10 years later, I guess to provide some corroborating evidence, he highlights in 87 a Fortune magazine article that came out about that time that showed that if you took the 500 largest service companies, 500 largest industrial companies, 1,000 companies, only 25 of them have an ROE greater than 20%. That is over the trailing decade at that time. And 24 out of those 25 beat the S&P. Pretty interesting. This leads to the idea of a sustainable growth rate. Um, you know, high ROE being attractive for two reasons. One, like we said, it just means that you're earning a good return on your investment. But the more important factor is this here, the power of the compounding. I mean, if you're making a high ROE and you're holding on to a lot of the profit, you're plowing it back into the company, you're earning that same high ROE all over and over again, year after year, then theoretically, without changing the capital structure of the company, this would be your annual growth rate that you could grow earnings. And we have an example below. This theoretical firm earning a 20% ROE, paying paying 30% out of it as a dividend, but retaining 70%. That's the key. We just go forward through a few years here. We start with $100 of equity, we earn a 20% ROE, and we hold on to 70% of it. And then we put that $14 back in the company, we earn 20% again, and then we do it again and again and again. And after look at this, we just went forward like 3 years. Earnings were 20, now they're 30, 50% jump in earnings. So I guess, if they're keeping the same payout ratio, dividend was 6, now it's 9. So at least in theory world, just to keep the same PE, the company's stock may be up by 50% in 3 years as well, or to keep the same dividend yield. So we think we know what to do. I mean, this seems really simple. I'm going to try to block that light behind me. Seems really simple. We are, we just go to any stock screener, right? That's on the web. Yahoo Finance, Google Finance, whatever, and we just set a hurdle for ROE. Show me all the companies with ROE greater than 20%. That's what I want to buy, right? And yet look at this particular company whose name has been hidden to protect something, probably my rear end. The ROEs are really high. You can see. I mean, these are I pulled these numbers from Value Line. The earnings are adjusted earnings, so we have some extraordinary items removed. Should be mostly the same, I think, as GAAP earnings. But look at what we see. Very high, I mean, unbelievably high ROEs. And then what did the stock do over this same time period? Well, Not a whole lot, especially look at the faint line what the S&P did. And it's not that they just weren't holding on to a lot of their profit. I mean, look at the percent retained. This is really high too. In fact, I think I computed the median. The median ROE over these 2 decades, 60%. The median percent that they retain, 80%. If you just multiply those two together, in the spirit of the sustainable growth rate equation, it's saying earnings growing at 50% a year. And did they do that? Well, no. I mean, there's some weird things going on too. Let me look at this. Like 2008, book value goes from 20 to 10 overnight, not overnight, over 1 year. If you have your book value, you're going to double your ROE without even changing your earnings, and something like that did happen here. There's another one here, 2013 to 2014. We also see kind of a halving of the book value, and I went back and looked up some of these. I think 1 year there was like a retirement, a projected pension benefit obligation that they re-estimated the value of, or it's a total non-cash sort of charge that ends up changing the book value on the balance sheet, but it hasn't really changed anything fundamentally with the cash flows of the company. So why are we looking at this? Apart from saying that the real world's always more complicated, we're looking at it because we're wondering, is there some other way to look at companies besides regular old accounting ROE and maybe get a more clear picture as to what's going on? Let's look at another one. We'll call this one Anomaly B. This company's name is also hidden just because I happen to own it. I've owned it for a few years now. This is almost like the opposite case here. What do we see? Well, in the beginning, the ROEs, again, is like these numbers that are just like 300% ROE. But then they flip and they go negative. And okay, they're not paying a dividend. ROE goes negative. Earnings still grow. In fact, earnings grow quite a lot. And what does a stock do? Well, over these 2 decades, too bad I didn't own it the whole time. Up like 4,000%. Here's where the S&P ended up after those 20 years as well. So let's see. I think I computed. Yeah, the median ROE minus 60%. The median retained, of course, is 100% because this company doesn't pay a dividend. So unless you're specifically screening for like negative book value, which can be attractive, if you're using just your random stock screener, setting the ROE hurdle for this company would have disappeared from your radar in 2009 with the negative ROE, and same sort of thing. What if we were looking for, ROE? We're looking at this, trying to draw some conclusions. What actually is going on here? In this particular case, I think the company's using debt-funded buybacks to reduce the share count, which is what helps the earnings grow so much. But it's still sort of the same question as we had with the last one. Is like, is there some other way to look at companies so that you don't get tripped up by seeing something like that? Tripped up. Maybe you don't get tripped up, but I look at this, and I wouldn't really know what to think about it, what conclusions to draw. Maybe I'd just look at earnings instead. So on we go to someone who solves the problem for us, Dr. Joseph Belmonte. He's an interesting person. Has this website, buffettandbeyond.com. I think he was a college professor, or still is, maybe. I think he also had a money managing business. How to describe him? I don't think he's well known. And the one other website I heard talk about him, let's say, said it in a very pithy way. They said he's very promotional. Which is true. He likes his stock picking system and believes in it. And ordinarily you get someone who's really promotional. It makes you want to run in the other direction. What are these people trying to sell me? But if you listen to what he's saying, you can't get away from the fact that it makes sense. It does to me. It does to me. So I'm gonna share his insight with you. So I'm putting words in his mouth here, but what I'm imagining he said to himself is, what are we really looking for when we're looking for high ROE? We're looking for a situation where management or the company is earning a high return for all of the money that the equity investors put into the company. Now, what money did they put into the company? Well, whenever you have an IPO or you have a secondary offering or anything like that, issuing shares brings in money from equity. So you've got that. And the other money that management has to work with is any profit that they make but don't give to you, the investor. So in other words, the earnings, the EPS, for example, reported profit, minus the dividends, they hold on to that. So what Dr. Belmonte says, I love this, is that when you're computing ROE, you got earnings on the top or net income on the top. Don't use book value on the denominator, because we saw that comes from the balance sheet and it can like change drastically from one year or one quarter to the next. Instead, what you use for the denominator is a running tabulation of all the money that equity investors put in the money. Those are those two sources I talked about. What money from the initial IPO, that's going to be actually usually very small, versus all the profit the company has reported that they made that they did not give to you. Just keep a running tab year after year. How much profit are they holding on to? That's the equity capital that we want to grade them on. And by doing it that way, that's how he computes this clean surplus ROE. So let's do an example so you can see how this works. Actually, this is more just explaining it. I don't know how helpful this slide is. I think I just said all of this, and we will do an example. But here's the idea, is that you need an initial book value. Think of it like a seed value, but think of it as a potentially quite noisy seed value of the money investors have put into the company, equity investors have put into the company so far. So we go far back in time if we can, if the company's been public. For this example here, I mean, I go all the way back to 2001. I do grab book value per share from 2001, and I use that only as my initial estimate of the money that equity investors put in the company, the owner's equity, that's the OE, in that first year. And then every subsequent year after that, my owner's equity for the next year is the previous year's owner's equity plus the profit they reported making in that year minus the dividends, because they gave that to us. And apart from that, you just compute ROE the same way. It's just your denominator is this running total of profit held onto and that initial book value to sort of get you started. And I guess that theoretically takes care of all the equity money up to that date, like in 2001. So maybe this is getting too complicated looking at it without numbers. So let's look at an example. Back to our company. This is the first one we looked at with these ROEs. I'm not saying they're fake. It's just that I mean, above 20% is supposed to be good, and this is like 130%. So what we're going to do is let's create another table on the right hand side, and we have ROE here. This is the accounting ROE, and we're going to compute the clean surplus ROE on the right hand side. And just as I said, in the very first year, we're going to get book value. We're going to get the first owner's equity as that book value. And apart from that, we're going to throw all the future balance sheets away. We're only going to use income statements from there on out. So we go to year 2. What is the owner's equity for year 2? The 1750 is 1370 plus the 435 in reported profit minus what they gave to us, which is the 55 dividend. So they held on to the residue of that, I guess they'd call it, and that becomes your owner's equity next year. And same thing, 2086 is 1750 plus 395 minus 59. We're still computing ROE the same way. It is this earnings divided by owner's equity, but our owner's equity is different from book value. Our owner's equity is going to be just this running tab as we go through time. You report a profit and you don't give it to us. Well, we're gonna grade you on it in the future. He doesn't really present it that way. I'm being a little bombastic, but if you look what happens, so obviously in the beginning we start with the very same ROEs because we started with the same book value, and our earnings are going to be identical. But here's the thing Dr. Belmonte says is that you really need to give it, like, I think he says maybe 8, 9, or 10 years for the clean surplus ROE to sort of converge. And if it's a company that is, I would say a company you would say one of those kind of steady eddies, maybe you'd say it has a mode, it has a competitive advantage, where it's not a commodity company that goes through, like they're making a bunch of money one year and oh now they're swinging to losses. Not like that. This particular company is a technology company, so they tend to I think people would say they have or they had a moat, and watch what happens here. So, after a few years, we do sort of settle down to this 18 to 20% ROE number. That's believable to me as an ROE. Again, I'm not saying this, we're not saying this is the real ROE. This is fake ROE. We're not saying that. It's just that, if you're going to be drawing conclusions from numbers about do you want to invest in this company, this seems like, to me, a better way to grade the efficiency of the managers of how are they deploying this profit that they're reporting making that they're not giving to you? Are they at least making more reported profit in the future? So let's go all the way down 2020, and what do we see happen? You see that they're keeping profit and they're putting it back in the business, and it's pretty high percent retained, and the ROEs are pretty good for a while. And then steadily, it's like once the next decade begins, they start to see a bit of a degradation. And what's interesting is look at the percent retained. I mean, they're holding on to they're holding on to less and less, which means it should be easier for them to put that to work and earn a higher. They have less to work with, so hopefully they can make more from that. It's less of a task to reinvest a smaller amount of money, right? But what happens is even though they're holding on to less and less, I mean, they're just giving us a bigger and bigger dividend, their ROEs are still going down. And maybe we give them a pass for 2020. It was, the pandemic and all that. But doesn't this sort of mirror what happened, what we saw with the stock a couple of slides back too? That could be a fluke. And there are lots of reasons that these ROEs don't necessarily translate into a stock chart that goes through the roof. I mean, maybe it started the 2 decades very overvalued or something like that. We're not saying that. It's just step back. Don't worry about, is this the real ROE over here? Just think about it like if you were thinking of investing in this company, what gives you a better picture of what's going on, what's happening to the equity investors in the company in terms of the return that they're getting? I mean, it's pretty clear to me. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Let's look at another one. Actually, this is the other one we looked at before, where it started off with the high ROE, incredibly high ROE, and then it flips negative. And, I would look at this and be like, I don't really know what this means. I'm supposed to be looking for high ROE, but now I got negative numbers, but negative equity means that, well, I don't know. However, let's go to clean surplus and just, same sort of thing. We start in the second year, 915 is that initial seed, 761 plus 154 minus 0. I think you got the picture. Let's go ahead and do it all the way out to 2020. So would you want to look at this to draw conclusions, or would you want to look at this? I mean, look, we give it a few years, like we said, 8 to 10 years. Let the ROEs, let the clean surplus ROEs settle to something. We don't really trust it in the first year or two because we're still kind of going from the noisy first estimate to converging. We again converge at like that 20% or so. However, they're holding on to all of it. And still they're earning this really high ROE. Like I said, I believe they're taking on more and more debt, so they're getting capital from somewhere else. But as an equity investor, this is what you are seeing in terms of your earnings per share and what's happening to your reinvested profit. Even 2020, where the other companies kind of really suffering because of the pandemic, this one is still going strong. And like I said, I'm not revealing the name of the company because I own it. It seems a little cheap. It's I think you would call it a specialty retailer. Um, so we've looked at two companies, and then you're like, okay, well, you're computing this other clean surplus ROE, but the problem is, this is some new efficiency ratio. How do I know what is a good return? I mean, what am I looking for? What is a good clean surplus ROE? Let me just say it that way. And Dr. Belmonte has a great insight again. He says, why not just do the same analysis on the S&P 500 and see what you get? I mean, that's going to be run of the mill or average. And then maybe what you want to look for, if you're looking for those special companies where they've either got a moat or great management or both or something like that, they're getting high, they're getting more than average return on that retained profit. Compare it to the S&P. So what do we see when we look at the S&P? Again, we ignore the first few years. It's still settling down, and what we end up with is this number that for the most part swings around between 10 and 14%. That's very typical. 12% is very typical, and I say that like I'm saying that because I've been using Clean Surplus ROE for probably about 7 or 8 years, maybe longer, and this is a very typical number for what you see for the S&P. Pandemic, maybe that's an abnormal year there. But bottom line, big picture, step back. What's a medium run of the mill clean surplus ROE? 12%, 13%. So any company earning a lot higher than that should maybe pique your interest. Here's another interesting thing. If you do just like take the last decade, do the median percent retained, that comes out to be 60%. Median ROE, 12%. Multiply those two, that's that sustainable growth rate kind of equation. You get 7% as being a sustainable growth rate for the S&P. That seems like a very typical annual growth rate for S&P earnings to me. So, of course, anytime somebody teaches you how to do something, your first thought is, yeah, but how do I make this better? That's what I wanted to do, was add my own mojo to this. So I thought, there are companies where they are using like extra debt on the side, and you're not seeing that by just looking at ROE. You'd have to be looking at return on capital to see that. So I thought, why not clean surplus ROC? Aha! We just add debt to the denominator along with that running tabulation of the profit that they're holding on to. Maybe use long-term debt or total debt or net debt if you want to take out the cash, whatever. But this would allow you to compute clean surplus ROC. And I used this for a while. I mean, when I first came up with it, I thought this is the greatest thing ever. That this was the missing piece for me. And after I used it a while, I thought, yeah, it doesn't really tell me all that much more. Here's what it can help explain. If you see some company that has like a 20% ROE and is growing earnings like crazy, like that company we looked at a couple slides back, and you're thinking, God, they're retaining 100% and there's still like 20% ROEs. It's because they're taking on extra debt to help things as well. And if you compute clean surplus ROC on a company like that, you'll see a much more, you might get like 8% or something. So then you see, okay, this makes sense. It's just that I'm missing the debt part of the equation. Dr. Belmonte, I don't think he thinks this is relevant because he stays away from high debt companies. And I'm not sure I'm remembering this totally right. My memory is that he likes companies with debt divided by net income less than 5. That meaning they could pay off all the debt with their profit in 5 years if they needed to. He may use 10. I'm pretty sure it's 5. So if you stick to those companies, maybe you don't need to consider the debt the debt side. Um, Here's another thing that bothered me that I had to fix, and that is that if a company has a loss in a given year, then when you do this equation, you actually end up removing money from the owner's equity, and you could sort of argue that two ways. On one hand, if they made a loss and money went out the door, they do have less money to work with, so you should be grading them on less. But I didn't like that because I thought really the spirit of all of this is if there's any money that I put in, I don't care if they made a loss one year or anything like that. I just want to know if you didn't give it back to me, I'm going to grade you on that. That's going to be capital I contributed to you going forward. So what do I do if it's a negative? I mean, this just adding the little blue thing keeps it where if it's a negative EPS, it clips it at 0 so that we don't end up shrinking the owner's equity if a company has a couple years of losses. Now, why could you also not bother with this step? I think Dr. Belmonte also does not bother with companies that swing back and forth between like losses and profits. He's looking for what he says he's looking for are the companies that have that a high ROE that is stable. It's like year after year. I mean, it's going to swing around a little bit, but for the most part, year after year, they have a consistently high ROE. That's what he wants to invest in. So if they have high debt, he's not interested. If they're kind of company that's reporting losses sometimes, I don't think he's going to be interested. So, I needed to add it for my own sanity. But if you pick his kind of companies, and it makes sense, pick the consistent ones, then maybe you don't need to worry about all this. So, let's talk about computing this. These are I mean, I've computed them for a number of companies. I used to maintain the whole S&P 500, clean surplus ROEs for all of them. But let's just look at a couple more companies so you can get a feeling for what clean surplus ROEs look like for a commodity company versus a company that has a moat. Now, I would say this is a moat kind of company. I've owned this one for coming up on like 10 years, and it's an alcoholic beverage company, a very large one. And if I had held it the last 20 years, look how well I would have done versus the S&P. I actually have only owned it for the past 10, and on top of it, I bought it during a time of sort of optimism. So net result, I've held it almost 10 years, and what return have I made? About the same as if I bought the SPY ETF, same as the S&P. Now that's kind of depressing, but the point of showing you this one, apart from saying it's not just the ROE, you have to look at valuation and sentiment as well, is you just get a profile of, I would say this is a profile of a company that had a very strong moat, was able to redeploy a lot of the earnings to make even more money, but over time their ability to do that just degraded. And look at where the ROEs are today. It's about the same as the S&P. So recipe for an underperforming investment is to pay too much in the beginning because everyone's optimistic about it, including you. And on top of that, have the company unable to hold on to the profit and redeploy it at that historically high ROE. That's what happened to me in this case. Haven't sold it yet, haven't given up, but I almost have. Here's another company that I've also owned for a long time, coming up on 9 years. And, I haven't owned it 20 years like this chart, but you can see how well you've done if you had. This is a non-alcoholic beverage company. Some people would call them a restaurant company, if that gives you any clues. But look at this. You see the difference between selling alcohol and not selling alcohol. Because okay, we give the first few years a pass. Clean surplus ROE is still settling out, but then we hit bad economic times, 2008, 2009, and ROEs drop because the earnings drop, but that's what happens with something that's highly discretionary, right? And then as soon as the good times return, well, they're back to making money again. And then the pandemic hits, and uh-oh. But again, you look at this profile and you say, well, usually they're earning quite good ROEs, and you maybe you live with the fact that occasionally that they do have down years when the whole economy goes down. And you just hold on to it because you know it's going to recover. Does take some intestinal fortitude, I would say. I didn't own it during this period, but my memory is, I think it was this company, is that during the great financial crisis, even though, I mean, this is a fantastic company. Anybody would say, oh, I go here all the time. I would love to own their stock. I wish I had owned it for, since the IPO. Well, I want to say that the stock dropped 70% during 2008, 2009. So, you needed to be a big believer. Maybe if you had been computing clean surplus ROEs and you saw that this was just, they seemed to be doing better and better and better, and then they hit a little blip, and you believe that they come back, you'd hang on to it. I have actually outperformed the S&P by about 4% annually since I've been holding this one. I still bought it at too optimistic of a time. If I'd bought it here, I would have done so much better. And this is a third one I throw up, and this is a company I don't think I've ever owned it. It's a commodity company. This is a steel company. So this would be more an example of what you might see for a company that goes through booms and busts. And, as I said, Dr. Belmonte is looking for that, like that stability year after year. There's really good ROEs and holding on to, I think he might say, at least 50% of the profit and putting it back in the business. And what you see with something like a commodity company is, I guess here they couldn't make enough steel, and then the financial crisis hit and nobody wanted to steel, and now people want the steel, but no, maybe we don't, and now we want steel again. So you can still do quite well in a company like this, I'm sure. I mean, if you buy it during times of pessimism and maybe offload it during better times, but and I mean, look at the chart. Over 20 years, it has beaten the S&P, not by as much as the others. But I mean, imagine if you were holding this this would be at the end of 2020. The price is the same as it was in 2006. Ooh, that would hurt. That would hurt me. Final comments. Okay, now that you've had a chance to see a few of these and maybe be convinced, maybe not, I would say that clean surplus ROE is a fantastic way to keep track of the efficiency of management and how they're using all this profit they say they're making that they're not giving to you. Also, we need an idea of, well, what is a good ROE, and we talked about just perform the same analysis on the S&P. You get about 12%. It's typical for the S&P. Look for something a few percent higher than that. I mean, maybe we're back at the Buffett 20%. ROE greater than 20%, and maybe that they retain at least half of the profit, ideally more, and that it's stable year after year. That might be an indication that you found a company that's somewhat special. As I'm stealing a line from Bruce Greenwald here, you would say if you saw that it might have these symptoms of having a moat, but it's really important for you to do the due diligence to find out what is the particular barrier to entry, what is the competitive advantage, how durable is it, and the really important thing, as we said, is that the ROE is just kind of like one side of the equation. I mean, we're talking about using the clean surplus analysis. It can help you gauge growth. You're seeing the return on retained earnings. It can help you gauge efficiency of the management if they're doing a good job at that, earning high ROEs. Maybe it helps you judge risk. If you see a company that is we saw the alcoholic company, bad times hit, it doesn't really seem to phase it as much as the non-alcoholic beverage company. Maybe that feeds into your discount rate that you use if you're using a DCF or something like that. But you got to have the value side of the equation, which this presentation hasn't even talked about. I would just say the blue point, the blue bullet is my real point. It's just as an opening gambit for what is a value company, or what would be a value screen would be low PE. I would say you can't necessarily trust, I don't trust a high accounting ROE as just an indication of quality, but a high and stable clean surplus ROE, I personally have more confidence in. And you kind of have to play around with it yourself and see if you're convinced. Now, as I said, it is possible, and I'm an engineer, so I like typing in numbers. Value Line puts out a new tear sheet on a company every 3 months, and so I liked getting the new sheets and updating the earnings and updating the dividends and keeping track of how is that ROE changing, how consistent has it been. That might drive someone else absolutely nuts. If you're doing it on like the Dow 30, very easy. But if you're expanded to the S&P 500, expand it to mid caps, and I mean, God, you've got a lot to keep up with if you're trying to keep relevant numbers on all the companies. So, Dr. Belmonte, I'm not. This isn't like a paid thing. I don't know him. He doesn't know me. But I feel the need to mention that he does. I mean, apart from the fact that he invented it, I should mention him, but give him credit. But he does have this website, buffettandbeyond.com, and he has a subscription service. I think he calls it just the computer program. The computer program that you can subscribe to. And what the computer program is are all of the updated ROEs for a very big universe of companies. So if you don't want to compute it yourself, you just want to quickly be able to go through a universe and sort for clean surplus ROE, set a filter, and drill right down into the companies that have that. Then I'm sure he's happy to sell you a subscription. And you can also, if you're interested, I mean, he has a book called Buffett and Beyond too, and that's where I learned it. There's two versions of it, but he has a newer one on Amazon now, and I will provide a link for that, and that will be. I used to have a website a long time ago, and I have an Amazon affiliate thing where I think I get some sort of credit if you use that link. That's my only connection to being able to earn any revenue off of what I've presented today. The rest is just like, I think, you learn. I've been investing. I mean, I can remember, I don't know how long I've been investing, but I remember buying Amazon.com right after 9/11. So I've been investing, at least to some degree, for a long time. And you learn all these little tips and tricks over the years, and often you think, oh, I've really discovered how to do it now. And then that little tool that you learned that you were so excited about, like I talked about my Clean Surplus ROC, a couple of months go by and you're like, I'm not so sure this is so great. And Clean Surplus ROE this is one of like a handful of things that I've learned a long time ago that I still use today. I just think it's valuable, and I kind of want the world to know about it, and yet not want them to know about it either, because it's kind of part of not my secret sauce, but part of my approach. It informs what companies I buy. So, what do you think about all this? Leave me a comment. Let me know. Till next time.